Out here in the Wild West, a man's past rides with him.
She pointed a knife. He offered his hand. She came with a knife in her hand and fear in her eyes, thought the world had given her nothing but pain, so she learned to cut before she got cut. But when she met him, he didn't reach for his gun. He just offered his hand. Steady, open, kind. "I ain't your enemy," he said. And somehow, the blade started trembling more than her heart. Out here in the West, kindness is rarer than gold, but stronger than steel. By sunrise, she wasn't holding that knife anymore, she was holding on to him. And maybe that's what real courage looks like. Learning to trust again. Before we begin, take a moment to comment the name of your city, where are you watching from tonight? And when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Sometimes, the West doesn't need another gun, just one hand brave enough to reach out. The American West, 1882. The wind howled across the burned plains, carrying with it the dry scent of dust and despair. The silver moonlight washed over a lonely ranch, where only the wind and the creak of an old wooden hinge broke the silence. The whole land seemed to be holding its breath, listening to the slow approach of fate itself. A woman emerged from the darkness, Evelyn Grace, her hair tangled, her dress torn and dust-stained, her hand clutching a small knife as if it were the last shred of hope she had left. She ran without looking back. Behind her, the echo of hooves and men's voices faded into the night, chasing her every heartbeat. Evelyn slipped through a broken fence and fell hard onto dry grass. She pushed herself up. Darting into the old stable, the faint glow of a kerosene lamp flickered from the house nearby. The horses snorted, their warm breath cutting through the cold air. Evelyn pressed herself behind a pile of hay, struggling to steady her trembling hands, her breath shallow and desperate. Then the sound of the stable door creaking open. Slow, heavy footsteps. A man's voice, low and rough like wind brushing over stone. "Easy, boy. Easy." Wyatt Cole, the cowboy of the Golden Wind, stepped inside. A lantern in his hand cast soft light over his weathered face and calm, steady eyes. Once a soldier, he had lost more than most men could bear, and now lived quietly on this patch of land far from people, far from his past. The light reached the corner where Evelyn hid. She froze. The knife flashed in her grip. "Stay back," she shouted, her voice hoarse with fear. "I'll stab you if I have to." Wyatt stopped. He didn't draw his gun. He didn't step back. He simply looked at her, not with threat, not with pity, but with the weary understanding of someone who knew what it meant to lose everything. He raised his hand slowly, his voice steady and warm. "Easy now. I ain't your enemy." The lantern flickered. Their shadows stretched across the wooden wall, one trembling, one standing firm like an old oak against the wind. Evelyn's arm quivered, the knife still pointed at him, but her eyes began to soften. In Wyatt's gaze, she found no fear, no contempt, only a quiet peace that made her want to believe, even as tears welled in her eyes. In that moment, the wind stopped. The knife slipped from her grasp and fell to the wooden floor with a soft, heavy sound, the sound of a heart unclenching. Wyatt stood still, his hand still outstretched. Evelyn gasped for breath, tears spilling freely now without her knowing. For the first time after endless nights of running, she saw something greater than fear trust. And for him, the cowboy who thought his soul had turned to stone. That moment reminded him maybe he hadn't forgotten how to reach out to someone trembling in the dark. That night, the wind stood still, and with it, two hearts began to beat again in the same quiet rhythm of the wild, untamed West. Part 1. A stranger in the stable dawn crept slowly across the plains, as if even the sky couldn't bear to break the fragile sleep of a night that had lasted too long. Soft gold light streamed through the cracks in the wooden boards, glinting off dust that floated in the still air of the stable, mingling with the scent of dry hay, old timber, and the quiet breath of the mustangs. Wyatt Cole stepped out of his small cabin. His long coat carried the weight of dust and time. His boots crunched against the dry ground with that steady rhythm only men of solitude carried. He lifted his face to the sun, pale, patient, and distant, the same light he loved but had long forgotten how to feel. His life, like this land, was built from dust, loss, and the quiet ache of endurance. He carried a metal bucket toward the stable to feed the horses. Inside, the animals stirred a few soft snorts, the sound of hooves shifting in straw. Wyatt paused. Beneath a pile of old blankets, a faint shape moved. For an instant, his hand slid toward the revolver at his hip. Then the light shifted, catching a face, young, pale, fragile. The same woman who had stood trembling before him last night with a knife now lay curled in sleep, her fear finally spent. Wyatt exhaled. He said nothing, only reached for a worn wool blanket hanging from a peg and draped it gently over her shoulders. His hands were rough, calloused, yet the gesture was so careful it seemed almost reverent, as if he were afraid to wake a dream that didn't belong to him. He turned to leave, but stopped when he heard her stir. Evelyn Grace blinked awake, her eyes adjusting to the thin gold light. The air was warm, still. No shouting, no hooves, no pursuit, only quiet, the kind that felt almost unreal. She looked down at the blanket around her and froze. Wyatt stood at the doorway, one hand in his pocket, his gray eyes unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. "Why didn't you throw me out?" Her voice was cracked, caught somewhere between disbelief and shame. He shrugged, tone even, calm as morning wind. Didn't see a reason to. No pity, no judgment, just calm. Steady indifference, or maybe something kinder than that. Evelyn sat up, pulling the blanket closer. The sunlight traced her cheekbones, the faint bruise near her jaw, the wary look that hadn't yet faded from her eyes. Around her, the stable smelled of hay and sweat and quiet. And that man still standing there, still watching without suspicion. Wyatt crouched, pouring feed into the trough. "There's coffee in the kitchen," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. "If you want it, you're not afraid of me." He straightened, glancing toward her through the sunlit haze. "I've been afraid of plenty of things. Ain't much left worth fearing now." She wanted to reply, but the words caught in her throat. There was something in that voice, a piece she didn't trust, but couldn't turn away from. Wyatt walked out, his shadow stretching long across the dirt, swallowed by the brightness of the rising sun. In his silence lingered a ghost, a wife lost to fever, an unborn child, and the echo of laughter that once filled a house now claimed by wind. He had built a life out of quiet, and perhaps that was all he meant to keep until a trembling girl appeared in the dark, and his instinct wasn't to fight, but to reach out. Evelyn sat still, sunlight spilling over her hands. She reached into her pocket. The knife was still there, cold, familiar. But this time, she didn't hold it. Instead, she pressed the blanket close to her chest, breathing in the faint scent of wool, wind, and the man who had left it for her. A scent that wasn't frightening, just warm. She stood, stepping out into the morning. The sun made her squint, its brightness almost foreign. Before her stretched the open plains, gold and endless. The horses grazed, and a small wind chime on the porch sang softly in the breeze. For the first time in days, she drew a breath that wasn't out of fear. Wyatt was at the porch, tending a small fire. A blackened coffee pot hissed above glowing coals. He didn't look up when he said, "You can sit. Morning sun here don't burn much." She hesitated, then sat on the old wooden chair across from him. They said nothing, only the sound of the wind, the soft boil of coffee, and the quiet effort of two people trying to forget what hurt them most. Wyatt poured the drink into a chipped enamel cup and slid it toward her. "It's bitter," he said, "but it's real." Her hands trembled as she took it. The first sip was sharp, earthy, then soft, spreading warmth through her chest like something alive. "Where were you running to?" he asked, voice low. She gave a small, broken smile. "I wasn't running to anywhere, just away. You probably know what that feels like." He nodded once, the kind of nod that said he did. The sun climbed higher, casting long streaks of light across the porch. Two strangers sat there, one carrying guilt, the other grief, and in the hush between them, the wind seemed to whisper all the words they didn't know how to say. Evelyn watched him from the corner of her eye. He didn't look at her like the world had not like a fugitive, not like a danger. He looked at her like she was simply human. And somehow, that was enough to make her heart tremble, but not from fear. Wyatt stood, dusted his hands, and started toward the stable. "If you plan on staying," he said without turning back, "I won't ask questions, but if you're leaving, at least have breakfast first." She didn't answer, just watched as his figure disappeared into the pale morning light. The wind rose, brushing her tangled hair across her face. She looked down at her hands, still shaking, and whispered softly to no one, "Maybe I'll stay." The wind of the west carried the scent of coffee and dry grass across the plains, gentle and forgiving. And in that quiet morning, something fragile but real took root, a small seed of trust, planted between two lost souls, growing in the forgiving light of a land that knew how to heal. Part 2, The Coffee and the Lie. Morning moved slowly, as slow as the breathing of the land itself. Sunlight filtered through a frayed curtain, cutting across the wooden table in long, tilted streaks. Inside the small kitchen, the scent of burnt coffee drifted through the air, mingling with smoke, wood, and the quiet ache of a lonely but peaceful life. Wyatt Cole sat at the end of the table, absently turning a tin mug in his hand. He didn't speak. He simply watched the steam curl upward, soft and ghost-like. This was his ritual every morning, no rush, no reason, just a man and his coffee, bitter enough to remind him that he was still alive. Evelyn stood in the doorway, clutching the edge of the blanket draped around her shoulders. Her eyes swept over the room, the dark wood walls, the worn table, a few chipped enamel cups all bearing the marks of time. But unlike the places she'd hidden before, this one carried warmth, the kind that came from living, not just surviving. Without looking up, Wyatt spoke, his voice low, calm, like the wind at dawn. "Sit. Coffee's hot." Evelyn hesitated, then stepped forward. The chair creaked softly as she sat. Wyatt poured her a cup, the rising steam blurring their faces for a moment. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice still trembling. He nodded, saying nothing. Took a sip, eyes drifting toward the open window where the dry wind wandered through the fields. Silence filled the room, not the heavy kind, but one that gave both of them space to breathe. Evelyn lifted the cup to her lips. The bitterness hit her tongue, rough and smoky. She grimaced. "Your coffee's strong." Wyatt smirked faintly, strong enough to make you forget fear if you let it. She let out a small laugh, brief, fragile, but real enough to startle her. After a pause, he asked, his tone steady, unreadable, "What's your name?" Her fingers tightened around the cup. The question was simple, but the truth behind it wasn't. She couldn't say her real name. Not after what she'd done. "Anna," she said quietly. Wyatt looked up, his eyes calm, gray. Steady, didn't question, didn't accuse. He knew. A man who'd seen too many lies didn't need words to recognize one. But he let it pass. "Anna." "Huh," he murmured, almost to himself. "Pretty name." She nodded, eyes down. "And you?" "Wyatt Cole." "Right." He chuckled, a sound, rough but honest. "That's me." Nothing much worth remembering about that name, except maybe half a pot of coffee every sunrise. They fell into quiet again, only the spoon tapping gently against the cup. Evelyn glanced at him at the rugged lines on his face, the worn hands, the steady presence that somehow felt safe. He looked like a man who'd been broken once, but learned to live with the cracks, a place she didn't dare believe could exist. "Why'd you help me?" she asked softly, her voice caught between fear and hope. "You don't know who I am, what I've done." Wyatt set his cup down, eyes fixed on the golden fields beyond the window. "Don't need to." "Why not?" He turned back, gaze steady, deep. "Because sometimes people just need a place to sit, without having to explain anything." The words hit her like a quiet mercy soft, but enough to undo the knots inside her chest. No judgment, no questions. Just space, the kind of grace she hadn't known in years. In the sunlight, the steam between them swirled like a veil, fragile, beautiful, and fleeting. Wyatt stood, poured more water into the pot. His voice was barely above a whisper, careful not to disturb the calm. "Coffee's strong, drink slow, or it'll set your heart racing." Evelyn smiled this time, a real smile, born not from fear, but from peace. "I think my heart's racing for another reason." He said nothing, just smiled the kind of smile a man gives when he's seen enough storms to know when to let the wind rest. Outside, sunlight spread across the golden plain. The horses stirred. The wind passed softly through the fence posts. The world seemed to quiet itself little by little, just like her heart. Evelyn looked down at her cup. The coffee still steamed faintly, the heat warming her trembling hands. But the tremor no longer came from fear. Something was melting her guard, her memories, her armor. Wyatt's voice broke the silence again, low and gentle, strong enough to melt your fear. She looked up, meeting his eyes, really meeting them this time. And there, between the light and the quiet, trust flickered faint, but alive. It was a simple moment, but to them, it was everything. Two broken souls sitting across from each other, learning slowly that maybe peace wasn't something you ran from. She didn't know where she'd go next or what tomorrow would bring. But for now, in this wooden kitchen, with the bitter coffee and the quiet cowboy, she felt safe. And somewhere deep within her, a small voice whispered gentle, hopeful, real. Maybe the world still has room for people like me to learn how to trust again. Her smile widened, small, but steady. Wyatt caught it, nodded once a silent acknowledgement, as if he'd just been handed something precious. The scent of coffee filled the cabin, mingling with the sunlight and the faint hum of morning wind. And in that quiet hour, amid the wild, merciless West, two souls began to learn the simplest truth of all kindness still has a place, even here, among dust and blood. Part 3. The Wounded Hand. Late afternoon, the last light of day spilled across the dry plains in streaks of gold and red. The western wind swept through, stirring dust into the air, mingling with the steady rhythm of horse hooves and the heavy breath of a land cooling toward night. Wyatt Cole was tightening the saddle on his black Mustang, Raven a stubborn creature, but the most loyal companion he had left. His rough hands, scarred and strong, moved with the patience of habit. Years of hard labor had dulled his nerves to pain. But that day, fate decided to knock softly, but deep. A crack of thunder rolled somewhere beyond the hills. Raven startled, jerking violently. In a flash, the horse's front hoof struck Wyatt's arm. The sound of metal clattering followed. Wyatt stumbled back, jaw tight, his left hand curling in pain. Evelyn, who'd been gathering hay nearby, turned sharply. Wyatt, she ran toward him, no hesitation, no fear. The small knife she always carried slipped from her pocket, hitting the ground with a faint flash of steel in the sunset before lying still in the dirt. Wyatt hunched over, gripping his wrist. Blood seeped through the cracks of his fingers, dark against the sunburnt skin. He bit down on the pain, silent. Evelyn dropped to her knees beside him, breath quick and uneven. "Don't move," she said. "Let me see." Without thinking, she tore a strip from her sleeve and wrapped it tightly around his arm. The air between them felt charged, the world outside fading into the sound of their breathing, sharp and alive. Wyatt looked at her. Strands of her hair brushed his arm as she leaned close. Her hands trembled, but they were warm, steady, careful, driven by genuine concern, not duty. "It's not too deep," she murmured, blowing gently on the wound as if her breath could calm the pain. "You'll be fine." Wyatt smiled faintly, a wince hiding beneath the gesture. "You're good at patching people up." Evelyn glanced up. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the air stilled. She realized she was touching the hand of the man she had once threatened with a knife. But fear no longer lived there. Only worry did. "Do you have medicine? I can find water." "No need," he said softly. His voice was low, but there was warmth in it. "You being here's enough." The words froze her. Her heart stumbled in her chest, not from fear, but from something gentler, more dangerous. Wyatt's gaze shifted toward the knife lying in the dirt, its blade catching the dying sun. He nodded toward it. Didn't need that knife this time. Huh. Evelyn followed his eyes. The knife her only protection. Her wall between herself and the world sat harmless now. Powerless. A small, tearful laugh escaped her lips. "Maybe. I'm learning to live without it." The sunset burned along the edge of her face, soft and red like a dying ember. "Good," he said quietly. "You don't need to be afraid here." She tightened the bandage around his wrist, voice trembling. "You don't even know what I've done." He looked at her, eyes calm, voice like the dry earth after rain. "Don't have to. People who are scared don't hurt others. The ones who don't know fear, they're the dangerous kind." Evelyn lowered her head, smiling through tears. Simple words, but they cut through the walls she'd built around herself for years. Outside, the sun sank behind the hills, setting the horizon aflame. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of scorched grass and the rhythmic thud of horses in the distance. Evelyn stayed there, her hand still at his wrist, careful, precise, as though she were mending something far more fragile than flesh trust. Wyatt said nothing. He didn't ask who she'd killed, or who she was running from. His silence wasn't cold, it was a kind of mercy. In his steady gaze, there was something rare, tenderness. The kind that only those who have lost everything know how to give. "You can stay a few more days," he said quietly as she tied the last knot. "You're not afraid I'll bring trouble. My coffee causes more trouble than you ever could." She laughed a real laugh, bright and small, but alive. The sound broke through the dusk like a bird taking flight. For a moment, the world around them shifted lighter, softer. When the sun finally slipped away, Evelyn looked down at his hand, large, scarred, still resting quietly in hers, and felt, for the first time in years, no need to defend herself. The wind picked up, tugging at the strip of white cloth around his wrist. Wyatt smiled faintly, his eyes glowing with that warm, quiet fire of a man who hadn't forgotten kindness. Evelyn smiled back just a little, but enough to make the dusty world around them seem brighter. In that wild western evening, where steel and fear had always ruled, a woman learned how to heal someone else, and a man learned how to trust a touch that carried no blade. The sun disappeared, leaving only two souls, one wounded hand, and one heart quietly. Finally, healing. Part 4. Shadows of the Past. The western night was unnaturally still. Only the wind whispered across the dry grass, the soft breathing of horses in the stable, and the faint creak of wood from the porch. Moonlight spilled through the window, silver and cold, onto the small room where Evelyn sat by the window, eyes wide open yet seeing nothing but the dark. Since sunset, sleep had refused to come. Inside her, everything still screamed images, shouts, the face of the man who had fallen before her years ago. Her hands trembled. She clutched the blanket around her shoulders, but the cold wasn't in the air. It came from within. From the next room, the glow of the fire painted the walls a dim, flickering orange. Wyatt sat near the hearth, working quietly on an old bridle strap. The leather creaked under his fingers. He didn't speak. The silence between them was fragile, so deep that even a breath felt like it could shatter it. Evelyn turned from the window. Her voice rasped from sleepless nights. "You're not sleeping either." Wyatt looked up, the firelight reflected in his gray eyes. "Not every night's made for sleep." She hesitated, then rose to her feet. Under the soft light of the oil lamp, her face was pale and worn, but in her eyes there was something more than fear, the weight of something long carried and finally ready to be spoken. She sat across from him, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I want to tell you the truth," she said softly. "You deserve to know." Wyatt laid the bridle down, meeting her gaze without a word. Evelyn took a long breath. Her voice cracked as if each word was being torn out piece by piece. 3 years ago, I lived in a small town down south. I had a little sister, Mary, 8 years younger. Our parents died early, and I worked in a saloon to feed us both. One night, a man came drunk, mean. He tried to take her. I stopped him, and he drew a knife first. Her throat tightened. I don't remember what happened next. I grabbed a bottle, hit him. Then the knife. I don't know how it ended. When I came to, he was lying still, blood everywhere. And my sister, she was screaming, holding me. Wyatt didn't move. The fire popped quietly, throwing shadows across his weathered face. There was no judgment there, no distance, only a calm that let her keep speaking. They said I killed him for money. She continued, voice breaking. Bounty hunters came. I ran. My sister was taken. I didn't even get to say goodbye. Her hands clenched at her chest, trembling like a child lost in a storm. I only wanted to protect her, but I lost everything. I've been running ever since, and I don't even know who I am anymore. Wyatt reached for a cup of water and slid it toward her. She didn't drink, she just held it tight, grounding herself in its solid weight. After a long silence, his voice came low, steady, the kind of voice that settled the wind itself. We all done things we ain't proud of, but you ain't that person no more. Evelyn lifted her head. Tears welled up not from guilt this time, but from the shock of hearing words she'd never been granted before. Words that treated her past not as a sentence, but as a wound that might still heal. Wyatt's eyes stayed on the fire. "You saved someone," he said quietly. Nobody was there to say it, but I believe it. Hands that shake don't belong to cruel people. Her tears fell freely now, soaking into the old fabric of her blanket, each drop washing away another piece of fear. Wyatt didn't comfort her, didn't touch her. He simply stayed silent, steady, like a wall strong enough for her to lean against without words. The wind slipped through the cracks, making the fire dance. Evelyn looked at him through the flickering light, his face half in shadow, half in gold. "Aren't you afraid of me?" she asked, voice trembling. "I'm more afraid of this world," he said, sipping the last of his cold coffee. "The ones who do real evil don't ever cry. You still do." She laughed through her tears, a fragile, aching sound. "You make me feel like I still deserve to live." He looked at her, his tone softening. "You don't just deserve to live, Evelyn. You deserve peace." Her name, her real name, fell from his lips gently, like wind through dry grass. She froze. She had never told him. Wyatt gave a small nod. "Heard you mumbling it in your sleep last night. Don't worry, I won't bring it up again. Just thought it sounded better than Anna." Evelyn laughed through the tears. For the first time, her name didn't feel heavy. It felt like home. Outside. The full moon rose high, its silver light stretching across the fields like a quiet blanket laid over tired souls. "My sister's name was Mary," she whispered. "I don't even know where she is now." Wyatt stood and walked to the window beside her, his silhouette outlined in moonlight. "We'll find her," he said simply. Maybe not today, but someday. Evelyn turned toward him, eyes shining with something she hadn't felt in years: gratitude, hope, and something deeper that neither dared name. That night, Evelyn wept. But they weren't tears of guilt or fear. They were tears of release. The tears of someone who had finally been seen, not as broken, but as human. Outside, the wind swept gently across the plains, soft as a hand brushing over an old scar, whispering through the night. Every soul, no matter how lost, can still find its way home. Part 5. The bandits return. The sunset bled across the prairie, painting the horizon in streaks of fire orange, crimson, violet. It was the kind of light only the West could make beautiful, dangerous, alive. The wind carried dust, the ghost scent of old gunpowder, and a whisper of trouble. Wyatt Cole was leading his horse, Raven, back to the stable. Evelyn stood on the porch, holding a bucket of water, watching his silhouette move against the burning sky. For once, the day felt quiet, the kind of peace that fools you into thinking the storm has passed. But in the West, peace never stayed long. Hoofbeats echoed in the distance, faint at first, then louder, sharper, coming fast. A flock of sparrows burst from the fence line. Evelyn froze, her fingers tightening around the wooden post. Wyatt's head lifted. His eyes darkened. Years of instinct told him what was coming. Inside, "Evelyn," he said, voice low and firm. "What's happening, bounty hunters?" he replied. "3 of them. Not locals." Her heart sank. The bucket slipped from her hand, water spilling into the dust. "They're here for me." Wyatt turned toward her, silent for a moment, his face unreadable in the red light. Then he said quietly, "Then I'll be the one to greet them." He stepped into the open yard, boots crunching against the dry earth. The dying sun flared behind him, glinting off the faint scar on his cheek. Evelyn stood frozen behind the doorframe, trembling, unable to look away. 3 riders appeared on the ridge. Dust rose around their horses' hooves. All 3 wore black hats, pistols gleaming in the fading light. The lead rider, tall, wiry, with a beard like steel wire, called out with a grin that didn't reach his eyes even, "Cowboy. Heard you've been sheltering a wounded bird here?" Wyatt didn't answer. The wind stirred, spinning red dust through the air. "We just want the girl," the man said, his tone oily, mocking. "Hand her over and you can keep playing rancher in peace. Simple deal." Wyatt slowly pulled off his gloves and dropped them into the dirt. The sound was small, but it carried weight. He straightened, his right hand brushing against the handle of his gun. His voice was calm, deadly calm. "You want her," he said evenly. "You'll have to go through me." Silence fell. The sunset caught the silver of his revolver, turning it into a line of fire. Evelyn's breath hitched. Tears welled in her eyes. She wanted to scream for him to stop, to run, but her body refused to move. Every word he spoke carved itself into her chest. The lead rider laughed a dry, ugly sound. "You'd die for a wanted woman." "You really that stupid?" Wyatt's lips twitched into a half smile. His voice dropped to a growl. "I don't die for anyone. I just live the way I damn well choose." The man spat into the dust and drew his gun. In that instant, time shattered. Bang! The first shot cracked the air. Dust exploded around Wyatt's boots. His gun was already up, his return fire flashing silver in the red haze. The prairie erupted, the smell of smoke and iron filling the wind. Horses screamed, dirt flew, and the world became a storm of gunfire and blood-colored light. Wyatt, Evelyn cried. She ran from the porch, her body moving before her mind caught up. A bullet grazed Wyatt's cheek, drawing a thin line of blood. He ducked behind the water trough, fired again, one man down. The second circled wide, shouting curses lost in the wind. Evelyn crouched behind a barrel, her heart hammering. Her fingers brushed against the knife she'd sworn never to use again. But when she saw Wyatt standing tall in the crossfire, his shirt streaked with blood, his body shielding her from death, she understood. Some fears were worth facing. Some people were worth breaking your own promises for. The last rider charged. Evelyn leapt forward, knife flashing in the dying light. The blade sliced across the man's wrist, his gun fell, clattering against the stones. Wyatt turned, firing one clean shot, then silence. Only the wind remained, carrying the scent of smoke and blood. Evelyn fell to her knees, the knife slipping from her fingers. Dust clung to her tears. Wyatt limped toward her, face pale but steady. "You all right?" he asked quietly. She looked up at him, voice shaking. "Why did you do that? They came for me." Wyatt smiled, faintly tired, bleeding, but alive. "'Cause I've stood alone long enough, Evelyn. And I ain't about to lose the one thing that makes me feel alive again." Behind them, the sunset burned itself out, their shadows stretching across the red dirt. One shape, not two. Evelyn pressed her palm to his chest, feeling the wild, steady beat beneath her hand. "You're insane, Wyatt Cole." "Maybe," he said, chuckling hoarsely. "But if a man's gonna be crazy, better it's for someone worth fighting for." The wind rose again, stirring the dust, carrying away the smoke. Evelyn looked up at the blood-red sky fading into violet. Somewhere deep inside, a truth settled quietly, painful and pure. This man had chosen to love her not with words, but with sacrifice. As the last light of day faded, the prairie fell still once more. The dust settled, the smoke thinned, and on that scarred land, where bullets once ruled, something gentler began to grow, a love fierce as fire and soft as the wind that carried it. Part 6. The Aftermath. The night after the gunfight, silence hung heavy over the ranch, a silence so dense it seemed to press against the earth itself. Gunpowder still lingered in the air, mixed with the scent of dry soil and blood. The barn door, one hinge broken, creaked softly in the wind, like the land was sighing after its fury had burned itself out. The moon cast its pale light over the ground scattered with footprints, bullet casings, and the still forms of fallen horses. Evelyn sat on the porch, her hands streaked with blood, her face drained of color. Before her, Wyatt Cole leaned against a wooden post, his shoulder wrapped in a blood-soaked rag, his breathing slow and labored. She pressed a clean cloth against his wound, her hands trembling. The blood spread too fast, blooming through the fabric like a dark flower. "Stop. Let me do it," she whispered, voice tight with panic. Wyatt didn't argue. He just looked at her, exhaustion in his eyes, but something gentler too. The moonlight caught his face, rough, worn, but softened by a warmth even the night couldn't hide. Her hands shook harder. "You're insane," she said, trying to steady her voice. Standing in front of them like that, he smiled faintly, crooked, tired, but real. I just did what I had to. She looked up at him, her eyes red. What you had to do was let me go, she cried. You don't understand. Wyatt, they won't stop. I'll only bring you more trouble. You should have let me go. He didn't speak right away. Slowly. He lifted his hand, the one still steady, and brushed her cheek. His touch was rough, stained with blood and dust. His voice came low, hoarse, pulled from somewhere deep. Couldn't. She froze. Why not? His eyes met hers unwavering, raw, full of truth. Because you're the first thing. He paused, breath shaking. I didn't want to lose again. The words hit like wind through ashes, stirring something alive that neither of them had dared name. Evelyn broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she buried her face against his shoulder, not caring that it was soaked in blood. Her sobs were quiet, desperate, human. Wyatt's right arm came around her, slow and careful, as if afraid she might vanish if he held too tight. The world around them fell silent. No gunfire. No wind, just two souls breathing in the wreckage. You don't know what I've done, she whispered through tears. I don't deserve to be saved. Wyatt shook his head gently, eyes steady on her face. Sure I do. But everyone deserves a chance to be forgiven. And if you can't forgive yourself yet, his voice softened, then let me do it for now. She looked up through her tears, the moonlight glinting off her wet lashes. And in that moment, she saw him not as a savior, but as a man learning to be saved by saving someone else. He wasn't invincible. He was just true. The wind brushed through the torn curtains. A horse stirred softly in the stable. Evelyn took his hand and pressed it against her chest. Can you feel it? She whispered. My heart. It's still beating. Maybe because of you. He smiled small, weary, warm. Mine too. For a long while, neither spoke. She leaned into him, feeling the steady rhythm beneath his ribs, two broken hearts finding a common pace. The moon climbed higher, spilling silver light over the wrecked yard. The smoke was still there, but its sting was gone, replaced by something quieter, something alive. Wyatt closed his eyes, his breath tangling in her hair. Tomorrow I'll fix the fences, he murmured. You just stay. Evelyn nodded, voice soft as the wind. I'm not leaving anymore. They sat there, side by side, on blood-stained earth. No promises, no grand declarations, just the warmth of each other's breath and the knowledge that it was enough. And in that still night, among ashes and shadows, love began to rise, not loud, not bright, but so real that even the world itself seemed to pause to listen. Part 7. Morning Mercy. Dawn came softly, as if afraid to disturb the weary souls still resting from the night's chaos. The first light crept through the torn curtains, bathing the wooden room in honey gold, blurring the traces of smoke and blood left behind. Evelyn stirred. No gunfire, no hoofbeats. Only the sound of the wind sighing through the fields and the faint, familiar scent of coffee in the air. She sat up slowly. Her shoulders ached. Her arms still bore the sting of strain, but her heart felt lighter, like it had finally unclenched. Across the room, Wyatt stood by the stove. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, a strip of white bandage wrapped around his left shoulder. He poured coffee into a dented metal pot, steam curling into the air, bitter, earthy, alive. He moved carefully, one arm still stiff, but there was a quiet steadiness to him, a grace born of pain endured too long. That sight, a man brewing coffee in a small wooden house, sunlight spilling across his back, was so simple, yet so peaceful. It made Evelyn realize how long it had been since she'd seen anything that gentle. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, breathing in the morning air. Fragments of memory flashed: screams, blood, fear, but they felt far away now, drowned beneath the warmth of brewing coffee. Wyatt turned, catching her gaze. "You're awake," he said, voice rough but soft, carrying a trace of relief he didn't try to hide. Evelyn smiled faintly. "I thought you'd still be resting." "Rested enough," he replied, pouring 2 cups. "Takes more than sleep to wash off last night." He handed her a cup. Their fingers brushed for a heartbeat brief, but enough to make her pulse quicken. She looked at him, the tousled hair, the dark circles, the wounded shoulder, and those calm, steady eyes. This man had risked his life for her, yet stood there now as if it had been nothing at all. "Thank you," she murmured. "It's just coffee," he said with a shrug, settling into the chair opposite her. They drank in silence. Sunlight streamed through the window, catching the dust in the air, turning it to flecks of gold. Outside, the morning wind drifted through the fields, carrying the smell of hay and life returning after chaos. Evelyn glanced out the window. The fence was broken, the barn half collapsed, but it still stood, like them, scarred yet whole enough to begin again. "What will you do now?" she asked quietly. "Fix it. Rebuild. Keep living," Wyatt said, as if it were the simplest truth in the world. Then, after a pause, "What about you?" Evelyn smiled softly. "I'll stay. At least until you finish that fence." He nodded once. The corner of his mouth lifted just a hint of a smile, but it was enough to make the morning brighter. Her eyes drifted to the table. There, beside her cup, lay the small knife, the one that had once been her only defense against the world. The sun struck its blade, scattering cold light across the wood. Evelyn picked it up, studying it in silence. Then, with a quiet breath, she set it down again. "Guess I don't need that knife anymore." Wyatt looked at her, his eyes catching the sunrise until they glowed amber. "Told ya. Darlin', ain't no weapon stronger than a kind heart." She laughed softly, a sound trembling between tears and peace. "You talk like someone who's been stabbed by one before." He grinned, pouring more coffee. "Yeah, and I just hope this time it don't leave a scar." They both smiled, no more words needed. Sunlight fell across their hands that had once trembled, once shed blood, now resting side by side in warmth and trust. Outside, Raven neighed softly. The breeze lifted the curtain, carrying the scent of coffee, earth, and a new beginning. Evelyn closed her eyes and breathed in. This was what she had prayed for, without knowing how to ask: peace that didn't require running, kindness that didn't demand payment. When she opened her eyes again, Wyatt was still there, calm and unshaken, as if he had always belonged to this morning. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not leaving me in the dark." He only nodded, turning toward the doorway. The light stretched long across the floor, painting his shadow firm and steady like the man himself, strong enough to carry silence without breaking it. That morning, Laughter returned to the little western ranch, quiet, hesitant, but real. The laughter of two people who had lost everything and somehow found each other again in the light of dawn. Part 8. The Trust. The summer wind rolled through the endless fields of barley, turning them into a sea of gold that shimmered and swayed beneath the sun. The sky stretched high and wide, so vast it seemed capable of swallowing every sorrow ever known to man. The air carried the scent of earth, dry straw, and sunlight after rain, the fragrance of the West reborn after a storm warm. Real, alive. Wyatt Cole drove a wooden stake into the ground, sweat glistening across his brow, dust clinging to his hands. Beside him, Evelyn held up a plank, her cheeks flushed under the sun. They worked in silence, the rhythm of hammer and wind their only music, broken now and then by her soft laughter whenever she missed a nail. "Didn't think building fences would be harder than a gunfight," she said, panting, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. Wyatt grinned that quiet, weathered smile that deepened the lines at the corners of his eyes. Gunfights last minutes, keeping something safe that can take a lifetime. She looked up at him for a second, eyes softening, then returned to work. The simplicity of his words sank deep like the steady thud of a hammer mending more than wood. They were rebuilding the fence around the ranch, the one that had been torn apart the night the bullets flew. Each plank they set upright, each nail driven into place, felt like stitching the fabric of their lives back together. Neither said it, but both knew this fence wasn't just wood and wire. It was trust rebuilt one heartbeat at a time. By noon, the sun burned white hot. The fields glimmered like molten gold. Evelyn sank down into the grass, breathless, sweat tracing a path down her neck, yet a smile free. Radiant curved her lips. Wyatt handed her a canteen. Ever ridden a horse before? She laughed softly, shaking her head. Never. I only ever ran from things, not with them. He set his hammer down, nodding toward the pasture. Then it's time you learn. Her eyes widened. You're serious? I can't even sit still for 3 minutes. That's all right. Horses don't like perfect folks anyway. They like honest ones. A while later, they stood in the open field. Raven, the black Mustang, pawed at the ground, mane rippling in the wind. Wyatt helped Evelyn up onto the saddle, his hand resting lightly at her waist. That single touch made her heartbeat stumble, not from fear this time, but from warmth. Keep your back straight, shoulders loose. A horse feels your fear the more you trust it, the steadier it gets. She swallowed hard, gripping the reins. I'm not sure I can do this. Trust me, he said softly. I won't let you fall. He took her hand, guiding her fingers around the reins. The horse started forward, slow and steady. At first, she was stiff, breath uneven. But then the sound of hooves, the rush of wind, and the sure weight of Wyatt's hand grounding hers, it all began to melt her fear away. See? He murmured with a faint smile. You're already better than most. Maybe I just have a good teacher. He didn't answer, only tilted his head as the wind swept through her hair, the scent of hay and sunlight rising from her skin. He breathed in quietly, as if that scent alone could remind him what living felt like. When she leaned too far, he caught her, their hands brushing again, and both laughed. The sound carried across the open field, bright and unguarded. The sunlight touched her face, her eyes alight, her smile wide, her brown hair rippling like the field itself. Wyatt reined Raven to a stop. He didn't speak. He just looked at her. A man who had spent years alone, certain his heart had turned to stone, could do nothing but watch, afraid that saying anything might break the fragile beauty of that moment. Evelyn noticed the look and laughed softly. "Why are you looking at me like that?" "'Cause I ain't ever seen anyone smile at the sun quite like you do." Her cheeks flushed. She turned away, but her smile stayed bright, unashamed. They sat there together on the horse, surrounded by the vast, whispering field. No more words were needed. The trust was there, alive between them, in the air, in the warmth of their joined hands, in the silence that didn't need to be filled. When he helped her down, his hand lingered a little too long around hers. Neither of them pulled away. They just smiled quietly, knowingly. She smiled like sunlight itself, free and golden, belonging to the land. And Wyatt, the man who once believed happiness was something buried in the past, said nothing, because sometimes joy doesn't need words. It only needs a look, a touch, and a summer afternoon full of wind, far across the plain. The barley swayed like waves beneath the fading sky, endless, glowing. And in the midst of that golden sea stood a man and a woman, no promises, no chains, bound only by the quiet, unshakable trust they had found in each other. Part 9. The Confession. The western night shimmered beneath a full silver moon. The sky stretched endlessly overhead. The stars scattered so close they felt almost within reach. The wind drifted across the fields, teasing the porch curtains and carrying the scent of wood smoke and the last trace of coffee from dinner. Wyatt sat on the porch steps, a half-burned cigarette glowing between his fingers. His gaze fixed on the dark horizon, quiet, steady though. Behind that stillness was a storm no one could see. Evelyn stepped out. She wore a thin shawl, her hair loose and gleaming under the moonlight. Each step on the wooden boards sounded soft, like the rhythm of the night itself. "You're not sleeping?" she asked quietly. Wyatt gave a faint smile, voice low and rough. "The night wind reminds me I'm still alive." "What about you couldn't sleep?" she said, settling down beside him. For a while, neither spoke. The chirp of crickets, the whisper of wind through the barley, the soft clatter of a horse shifting in its stall, all came together in a quiet symphony only the desert knew. Evelyn's eyes wandered to the horizon, where moonlight painted the fields silver. That light brought back memories, nights with the same moon, but filled with terror. The moon that had shone on her blood-stained hands, the face of the man she'd killed, the reflection of her own horror staring back at her. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. "I still dream about it, Wyatt." He turned slightly, his expression softening. "About what?" "That night. I see the blood, the knife. I hear him breathing and then not. I wake up drenched in sweat, certain he's still there, still watching me." Her voice cracked, each word dragging itself out of her throat like shards of glass. "I don't think I'll ever escape it. No matter what I do, even when I laugh, even when I try to live when the night comes, I'm still that girl. Scared, dirty, wrong. I keep thinking someone will find me. And this time, there won't be anyone left to hide behind." Wyatt said nothing. He watched the fields instead, the way the moonlight shimmered on the waves of barley. After a moment, he reached out, resting a firm, steady hand on her shoulder. "Then let me be the one who stands between you and the dark." The words landed softly, not a promise, but a shield. something strong and kind enough to break through the trembling in her chest. Evelyn shivered, voice barely a whisper. "You don't know what you're saying." "I do," he replied. His tone was deep, certain. "I've lived in the dark long enough to know nobody walks out alone. But when someone's willing to stand there with you, the shadows lose their teeth." She turned toward him. The moonlight fell across his face, silver, quiet, true. His eyes no longer belonged to a weary soldier. They were the eyes of a man who'd found something worth believing in again, and maybe, for the first time, someone worth saving. Tears welled in her eyes, not from guilt or pain, but from the rare, raw ache of being understood. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Wyatt didn't move. He just let her rest there, the sound of his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. Her breath fell into rhythm with his, and outside, the night continued its slow, patient song. "You know," she murmured, her voice husky. "I used to think no one could ever understand me, that I'd spend my life running." "Then stop running," Wyatt said gently, his voice like the low hum of an old guitar. "If the night comes back for you, I'll keep watch." She gave a small, tearful laugh. "You're making me believe in foolish things, Wyatt Cole." He smiled faintly. "Out here, darlin', foolish things are the only ones worth believing in." A gust of wind swept through the porch, lifting her hair and tugging the shawl from her shoulders. Wyatt caught it before it flew away, wrapping it gently back around her. His fingers brushed her neck warm, careful, real. Evelyn looked up at him. Moonlight reflected in both their eyes the same quiet glow of peace neither thought they'd ever find again. She didn't speak. Instead, she leaned closer, resting her forehead against his chest. Wyatt's hand came to her back, holding her with the gentleness of someone who had once forgotten how. No vows, no grand words, just the simple, silent understanding between two hearts still beating after everything. For the first time in years, Evelyn wasn't afraid of the dark, because she knew beside her sat the man who had chosen to stand between her and everything that once haunted her. And that night, under the western moon, two lost souls who had lived too long in shadow finally found each other in silence, trust, and mercy. Part 10. The Hand That Never Let Go. Dawn crept slowly across the prairie, stretching a ribbon of warm gold across the sky. Dewdrops clung to the tips of the grass, glinting like tiny diamonds scattered over red earth still cool from the night. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers, new sunlight, and a faint trace of last night's coffee still lingering from the dying fire. Evelyn stepped onto the porch, wearing a loose beige canvas coat, her hair tied carelessly back. Each footstep was light, careful as though she feared disturbing the fragile peace that had finally settled after so many restless years. Out in the yard, Wyatt was leading two horses, Raven and Dusty, out of the stable. His shadow stretched long across the damp ground, solid and unhurried, as if the land itself had been shaped to hold him there. She stopped mid-yard. The first rays of morning lit her face soft, calm, unafraid. In her hand, she held the old knife, the one that had once drawn the line between life and death, between survival and fear. Wyatt turned and smiled. "Ready?" "Evelyn Grace." She nodded, her voice steady. "I am." For a moment, she stared at the knife. It had been her companion, her weapon, her shield, but now it was nothing more than a relic of the woman she no longer was. Evelyn took a breath deep, certain, and opened her hand. The knife fell. The sound was small, yet it echoed like thunder. The dull blade caught the sunlight one last time, flashing bright, beautiful, sorrowful, final like a single tear bidding farewell. Wyatt watched, his eyes gentle and deep as rain-soaked earth. He didn't speak, only nodded, understanding that she'd just crossed the last border of her past. Evelyn smiled faintly. "Guess I don't need that knife anymore." Wyatt stepped closer, his voice low and warm as morning smoke. "Told ya, darlin', ain't no weapon stronger than a kind heart." She laughed, eyes shimmering in the sun. "And you're living proof of that." He reached out his hand, not the hand of a hero, but of a man rough, scarred, once trembling. Evelyn looked at it for a moment, then took it. His hand was warm, his grip firm enough to tell her it wouldn't let go again. Together, they walked toward the horses. Wyatt helped her onto Raven, then swung himself up onto Dusty. The sun spilled sideways across the field, bathing them both in liquid gold. "Where to now?" she asked, smiling. Wyatt's gaze fixed on the horizon, the rising sun fierce and free. "Someplace where the wind don't carry the sound of guns." She nodded. They nudged their horses forward. The sound of hooves mingled with the morning breeze, with the songs of birds and the soft creak of leather reins. The camera of imagination pulled back two riders moving slowly through a golden sea of barley, the sun breaking into 1,000 flames upon their shoulders. A lone guitar began to strum, joined by the haunting wail of a harmonica, a song as wild and tender as the West itself. She came with a knife and left with a hand that never let go. The wind rose, lifting dust and light together into a swirling halo around them. They rode on beneath a crimson sky, never once looking back. Behind them, the old knife lay still in the dirt, its dull shine fading as if the past itself had finally been laid to rest. The West stretched endless before them, vast, forgiving, eternal. And in that boundless silence, one truth lingered: love, when it's real, can make even the darkness bow its head. The light softened to amber as evening fell again across the plains. The land itself seemed to embrace them, gentle and wide, cradling the souls that had found their way home. A low guitar hum carried through the wind, followed by a voice deep, calm, and full of that old Western grace. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Because out here in the Wild West, love doesn't just find you, it redeems you. The sun sank beyond the ridge. Two riders disappeared into the horizon, leaving behind long trails in the red dust. On the porch, an old wooden sign swayed in the wind. Wild West, U.S. carved deep into its surface, the sunlight glinting across its cracks like the scars of souls once healed there. Subscribe to Wild West U.S., where every cowboy finds his way home. The western wind rolled across the plains, carrying with it the faint echo of guitar strings and distant laughter, and a simple, unyielding truth. Cold cowboys love through redemption. Second chances ride in the West. Love that saves a man from himself. The last light faded, and night descended, but it was no longer the darkness of fear. It was the calm of peace, hard won. Because out here, in the wild heart of the West, love doesn't just find you, it brings you back to the best part of who you are. Wild West, U.S., where every cowboy finds his way home.
He found peace not by forgetting his past, but by forgiving